Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we are unpacking the fascinating biology, anthropology, and psychology behind human relationships. It's a topic that's, well, deeply evolutionary, highly philosophical, and let's be honest, incredibly personal, all at the exact same time.
So did ancient humans really just have one partner? To get to the actual truth, we've got to look past our modern cultural assumptions and dig into the real clues our ancestors left behind. Because, spoiler alert, the real story isn't found in romantic comedies. It's hidden right there in our bones, our cultures, and our DNA.
Let's just dive right in. The answer is absolutely not a simple yes or no. Actually, it's mostly, kind of, with significant variation. It's a messy reality that honestly satisfies no one completely, which, if you ask a scientist, usually means it's highly accurate. To really understand human nature, we have to unpack what partnerships actually looked like in the ancient environments that shaped us.
To solve this mystery, we'll trace the evidence across 6 key areas: clues in our biology, cultures, wealth, and marriage, the social power of monogamy, what the DNA tells us, jealousy and the pair bond, and finally, the messy middle ground.
Starting off with Section 1, Clues in our biology. Let's look at our physical anatomy. You've got to notice this concept of Goldilocks biology. Think about species with strong polygyny, like gorillas, for instance. The males are massively larger because they literally have to win violent fights for mates. But in strict monogamy, the sexes are practically identical in size, zero size difference, because there's just no fighting advantage needed. Humans, though, we sit right in the middle. Human males are roughly 15 to 20% heavier than females, so this moderate size difference basically proves we aren't strictly monogamous, but we aren't highly polygynous either.
And this whole middle ground idea is brilliantly illustrated by another, slightly more personal biological clue: testes size. Chimpanzees have large testes, high promiscuity, and intense sperm competition. Gorillas, small testes, exclusive harems, and basically zero sperm competition. And human anatomy? It falls exactly between those two extremes. It points to a remarkably mixed, highly variable mating system.
Moving on to Section 2, Cultures, Wealth, and Marriage. Since our biology points to this messy middle ground, let's see how actual human societies organize themselves.
Now, you might hear this massive number cited pretty often. 80 to 85% of documented human societies permit a man to have more than one wife. That is a striking statistic, and it's often used to argue against monogamy. But hold on, because without context, this number is actually incredibly misleading. See, there is a vast difference between a society permitting a behavior and its people actually practicing it. Think about it. Polygyny requires resources. You have to be able to actually support multiple partners. And historically, most men, especially in our egalitarian hunter-gatherer days, simply did not have the surplus wealth to pull that off. So even in societies that legally permitted it, the lived reality for the vast majority of humans has almost always been one partner at a time.
That brings us to Section 3, the social power of monogamy. If flexible monogamy was the natural norm, why did some societies go out of their way to legally enforce strict monogamy? Let's look at how this actually builds a stronger society. Socially enforced monogamy is essentially a brilliant piece of social technology. First off, it gives lower status men access to partners. By neutralizing large groups of unpartnered, highly competitive men who historically, kind of disrupted cooperation, it dramatically reduces male-on-male violence and brings peace. It also increases paternal investment in children, and ultimately it generates long-term social stability and cooperation. Basically, a society cooperating like this is always going to outcompete one that doesn't.
Okay, Section 4, what the DNA tells us. Anthropology gives us the theory, but our genes remember the exact truth of what happened. 16 to 19 million, that is a staggering number, and it represents the living male line descendants of just one single, highly successful Bronze Age man from the Eurasian steppe. Tracing the Y chromosome proves this wasn't just some random variation. It reflects a heavily stratified system where a tiny fraction of men had massive reproductive success, while a whole lot of men had absolutely none.
What this DNA data reveals is that hoarded wealth completely changed the game. If you think about our hunter-gatherer era, resource sharing was mandatory. You had lower inequality and flexible pair bonds, which structurally limited extreme polygyny. But jump ahead to the Neolithic and Bronze Age? Wow! Once a man could own land, hoard cattle, and pass it all down to his sons, a select few men could dramatically expand their wealth.
This created extreme male reproductive inequality, temporarily overriding our deep egalitarian roots. Which leads us to Section 5, jealousy and the pair bond. Despite wealth totally altering our mating math, a very deep neurochemical architecture survived millions of years.
If you've ever felt a pang of jealousy, you are literally feeling evolution at work. You see, you don't evolve a psychological mechanism for a threat that never occurs. Jealousy evolved specifically to protect against very real, distinct reproductive threats. For an ancient man, male jealousy was triggered most intensely by sexual infidelity, the risk of paternity uncertainty, investing precious resources into another's child. For a woman, female jealousy was triggered most intensely by emotional infidelity, the risk of her partner diverting vital resources and protection elsewhere. This universal human jealousy absolutely proves that the pair bond was a consistent, critical feature of our past.
And listen, we absolutely cannot understate the power of active female mate choice here. In hunter-gatherer societies, women were continuously observing and actively selecting their partners. They favored men who possessed physical capability, sure, but also sophisticated social skills and demonstrated generosity. In a small group where literally everyone watches everyone else, being a reliable contributor to the collective welfare was pretty much impossible to fake.
Let's bring it all together in Section 6, the messy middle ground. What does this all actually add up to?
Well, marriage is a universally documented human institution. Every single human culture has invented some form of it. This proves the underlying pair bond is incredibly profound, a true human universal. Yet, the fact that we constantly have to socially manage it, create rules and formalize it, that suggests it's fragile enough to require structural support. Think about it. If we were flawlessly monogamous by pure instinct alone, we simply wouldn't need cultural rules to enforce it.
So our ultimate scientific conclusion is a term called facultative monogamy. Basically, facultative monogamy with variation. This is a mating system where the default is a recognized pair bond with a primary partner, but it remains flexible enough to accommodate extra pair relationships. The pair bond is our baseline, hardwired deep into our neurochemistry, but we have always navigated complex relationships outside those bonds at significant rates. It tells us that human sexual behavior is, and literally always has been, this continuous, messy negotiation between our biology, our culture, and our individual circumstances.
So here is the big question. If our history is this messy, how does it change the way you view your own connections today? The reality is delightfully complicated. If you have ever found a relationship complicated, well, take comfort in the fact that you are simply experiencing millions of years of our messy, beautiful, evolutionary architecture at work. We are creatures of deep attachment built for a world of endless variation. So keep exploring, keep questioning, and we'll see you in the next explainer.
Ever found yourself endlessly swiping on a dating app and wondering, why do we actually love the way we do? Did our ancient ancestors experience these exact same heartbreaks and desires? Well, if you've ever asked yourself these questions, you are in the exact right place. Welcome to this explainer, where we are diving deep into the fascinating and honestly surprisingly complex world of ancient romance and human attraction. Today, we're unpacking what the biological, archaeological, and anthropological records reveal about the ultimate human game, mating. So, what actually comes to mind when you picture our ancient ancestors looking for a partner? For decades, pop culture has pretty much fed us this one specific image, right? A grunting, unkempt caveman simply dragging a partner by the hair. But when we look at the actual structural evidence our ancestors left behind, stuff hidden right inside their bones and their beautifully crafted artifacts, a wildly different picture emerges. Basically, it is time to completely shatter that brutish caveman stereotype. The science shows us that our ancestors' romantic lives were actually driven by some incredibly deep, complex evolutionary math. They weren't just passively existing in some crude state of nature. As we're going to see in this explainer, they were highly strategic, culturally adorned, and navigating a seriously complex social landscape just to find and keep a partner. So here is our roadmap for today. We're going to cover the roots of attraction, ancient adornment, biological clues, society and wealth, the psychology of jealousy, and finally, our messy baseline. Let's jump in. All right, part 1, the roots of attraction. Let's start with physical attraction. Now, physical beauty often feels like a super fleeting, totally arbitrary cultural trend, but it actually rests on a very stable, deep evolutionary foundation that has been running in the background of the human brain for an extraordinarily long time. It turns out our brains evolved to subconsciously read things like facial symmetry and clear skin as honest, hard-to-fake signals of underlying health and genetic quality. Think about it. Symmetrical features generally correlate with stable childhood development free from severe illness, and clear skin directly signals the absence of active infections or parasites. Our ancestors definitely weren't sitting around doing this math consciously. Their brains just evolved to find these specific traits appealing, because choosing partners with these traits meant producing healthier kids with much better survival odds. Moving on to part 2, ancient adornment and beauty. Now, ancient humans didn't just wake up and rely on whatever natural looks they happened to be born with. The archaeological record proves they were actively, deliberately managing their appearance long before written history even began. Tens of thousands of years ago, people were dedicating massive amounts of time and specialized skill to crafting dedicated grooming tools, like intricately carved antler combs. They were stringing delicate beads from shells, bone, and ivory, and heavily using red ochre as a cosmetic body paint. We even see evidence of extreme body modification practices, like intentional scarification or filing their teeth. All of this proves that deliberate social presentation mattered enormously back then. They were actively managing their beauty and status with real intention, not just living in an unkempt state. Which brings us to part 3, the monogamy biology clues. Okay, so once you've attracted a mate using those biological signals and adornments, what happened next? Did our ancestors stick to one partner, or did they have many? To answer that, we look for clues hidden right inside the human body itself, specifically body size differences between the sexes. In strictly monogamous species, males and females are basically the exact same size, because there's no need for males to physically fight each other to secure a mate. But in species with strong polygyny, where one male fights to mate with many females, like gorillas, for example, the males are massive. They are roughly twice the size of the females, so they can win those physical fights. But humans, we sit awkwardly right in the middle. The average human male is roughly 15 to 20% heavier than the average female. And that tells us our evolutionary past was neither strictly monogamous nor strongly polygynous. And this middle ground theory is backed up by another totally fascinating biological indicator, testes size. This acts as a really clear biological clue for sperm competition. Chimpanzees, who are highly promiscuous, have enormous testes because sperm from different males literally compete inside the female reproductive tract. Gorillas, on the other hand, where a dominant male has exclusive access to his partners, have relatively small ones. Once again, humans fall perfectly between these two extremes. It points purely to a messy, intermediate mating system. It suggests that while we certainly weren't as promiscuous as chimps, females in our evolutionary past absolutely did sometimes mate with more than one male in close succession. All right, part 4, society, wealth, and mating. So our biology clearly points to this mixed, complicated evolutionary system. But how did human societies actually organize marriages once we started forming distinct cultures? If we look at the cross-cultural anthropological record, the data might actually shock you. A striking 80 to 85% of documented societies, legally or culturally, permitted a man to have more than one wife simultaneously. A lot of people hear that and immediately assume, oh, polygyny is just our natural human default. But looking solely at cultural permission is completely misleading if you don't understand the actual lived practice on the ground. The crucial point here is that legal permission does not equal everyday practice. Even in societies that legally permit polygyny, the vast majority of actual pairings on the ground are still monogamous. Why? Well, historically, having multiple wives was an extreme economic luxury. It was typically reserved for only the highest status, wealthiest men. The average guy throughout human history simply did not have the immense material resources, the surplus food, the land, the livestock, required to attract and support multiple wives. So by pure economic default, most men still only had one partner at a time. Tracing this timeline really makes the wealth dynamic crystal clear. Early egalitarian hunter-gatherers defaulted to a sort of flexible monogamy, simply because you couldn't hoard wealth to support multiple partners when you were constantly moving around. But the Neolithic invention of agriculture? That changed absolutely everything. It allowed high-status men to accumulate heritable wealth, like land and cattle, and then use it to completely monopolize reproductive access. By the Bronze Age, this led to just extreme reproductive inequality. In fact, genetic studies show that one single, highly powerful man living roughly 4,000 to 5,000 years ago left behind between 16 and 19 million male line descendants alive today. That is wild. Our human genetics fiercely remember this stark inequality of our past, even if our history books gloss over it. Up next, Part 5, The Psychology of Jealousy. Because securing these partnerships and resources was literally a matter of life and death, our brains evolved a highly specific, deeply uncomfortable emotional alarm system to protect those bonds. Yep, we're talking about jealousy. And this actually beautifully contrasts the evolutionary roots of jealousy across cultures. Men and women both experience intense jealousy, for sure, but evolutionary theory predicts different historical triggers. Men historically reported more intense psychological distress over sexual infidelity because it triggered the ancient biological fear of investing precious, hard-earned resources into another man's offspring, a concept known as paternity uncertainty. Women, on the other hand, historically reported more intense jealousy over emotional infidelity, fearing the devastating loss of a partner's provisioning being permanently redirected to another woman and her kids. Finally, Section 6, our messy romantic baseline. Historically, high-status men hoarding all the partners created a massive societal problem, large groups of angry, unpartnered, and highly disruptive men. To solve this chaos, many cultures independently utilized socially enforced monogamy as a stabilizing technology to actively lower male-on-male violence and increase a father's investment in his kids. But if we strip away those cultural rules, our true biological baseline is what evolutionary biologists call facultative monogamy. This just means that forming a primary pair bond is a universal human reality. We form deep, emotionally significant attachments. But that bond exists in a messy middle ground where exclusivity has always been heavily negotiated. We are deeply wired to form primary bonds, but historically, humans also maintained or sought relationships outside those bonds at significant rates. Which leaves us with a lingering thought. The specific shape of any human partnership is really a constant, ongoing negotiation between our deep evolutionary biology and our current culture. So the next time you're swiping on a dating app, subconsciously evaluating a profile picture for a symmetrical face, or feeling a sudden, unexplained pang of jealousy in a relationship, ask yourself, are you really making a purely modern choice? Or are your ancient ancestors still quietly pulling the strings?